A very good afternoon to all the participants. We will shortly start our webinar in a minute. We're just waiting for more participants to join in. So a good afternoon again. I'm Gautam Pant. I lead the power practice for Marsh India. It's 4 and time to begin our webinar chapter 2. We did our power and utility webinar chapter 1 in November, wherein we covered some very eminent topics like environmental social governance, parametric solutions, and risk finance optimization. And here we are again with a very good panelist talking on various subject matters. Can you scroll through the next slide, please? So as we start, just to set up some minor instructions on for the webinar, we want to make this webinar more interactive with your question and answers. So there is a question and answer tab at the bottom panel of the Zoom link. Anytime during the webinar, when you have a question, you may just type in your questions and we will like our panelists to answer that question live or on chat itself. If towards the end of the webinar where we have kept a question and answer round, you have a question, please raise your hand and we would like to unmute your line and discuss your query then in the Q&A session itself. To make it more interactive, we have kept few poll questions, which will be leading to the sessions as we move ahead. We would request your enthusiastic participation on all the poll questions so that we also have a sense on how we are going and what is exactly the mindset of our audience here. Next, please. To quickly introduce with our panel today, we have Mr. Glenn Priest. Glenn Priest is Managing Director, Power and Utility for Marsh Asia. Along with him, we have Mr. Benjamin Chang. Ben is the Senior Vice President and Leader for Power and Utility for Asia region. We have Stephanie with us, who is our Regional Claims Director for Marsh Asia. We have Mr. Siddharth Patnaik with us. Siddharth sir leads our claims practice in India. We have Mr. Bhishma Maheshwari. Bhishma is the leader for Cyber and FinPro for Marsh India. And we also have Mr. Sandeep Puglia. Sandeep leads our power risk engineering practice in India. Along with them, I'm Gautam Pant. I lead the power practice, as I just mentioned. Go ahead. So just setting the context for our webinar going forward. As we all are aware that risk is a dynamic term and it keeps evolving as and when we feel that we are prepared for it. There is something new which comes up. And when we talk about the underwriting aspects, because of the changing profile of losses in the industry, the underwriters are looking for more focused underwriting standards. And so risk engineering or risk evaluation has become a very prominent issue and a very critical part of our underwriting submissions. It's always good to learn from losses in our industry, and what we have done is we have just tried to encapsulate few large claim losses to give you a background on learning from losses. There is an evolving term around ESG. We discussed this in detail in our chapter 1 in November. We have some interrelated topics to ESG, which is environmental impairment liability, which Bhishma will be talking towards the end of the webinar. And there are evolving risks, which is cyber and environmental impairment, which we are also covering as part of this webinar going forward. So that will be our flow of presentation. We'll be talking about the power market update, large losses in the power sector in India and in Asia, the risk engineering, how it's important, why it's important, the implication of underinsurance and valuation. So we have kept, along with the losses, we have tried to bring in our claims specialty to talk about the underinsurance and valuation. How is it impacting the claims, outcome? Cyber risk and environmental impairment liability, as we just mentioned, are emerging risk trends and boardroom discussions. We will be covering these. With this, we will move to our first poll question now. Were you able to attend the chapter 1 of our power webinar in November 2021? Great. So some of you attended it, some missed it. We will be sharing a link along with this presentation. We'll be sharing the link of replay for our webinar number 1 as well, chapter 1, which is also available to our LinkedIn post. So, it will be available for you. Next question. From the power industry perspective, what do you think are the major emerging risks for power sector? We have multiple choice that you can make for this question. Great. So as we expected in the chronology order, climate regulations are becoming a very eminent topic to be discussed in the boardrooms and, key risk along with definitely others. And I can see, few of our participants talking about cyber, which definitely is the risk for the future. So thank you. With this, I hand over the next slide to Ben for taking us through the power market updates in the Asia region. Ben?
Yes, thank you, Gautam. Welcome, everyone. So thank you for your time. I'm just going to share a bit with you today about the updates and the status of the power insurance market. But we can't really go into the power insurance market without talking about the global commercial insurance market, because power insurance is just a small part of this whole marketplace. So a question you don't have to answer me, but when was the last time you went into a renewal asking for a reduction from your insurance broker or for your insurance provider or insurers, right? It might be something still very new into your mind, but because we have for 15 years of soft market condition, as you can see from the chart here. But in Q4 2017, the market starts to change. And what we call this, we move into what we call a hardening phase of the market where commercial insurance price starts increasing. And without we have already 16 consecutive quarters of price increase. So this is about 4 years. The good news is that the increase sort of picked off during end of last year. and the rates is still increasing, but the rate of increasing is slowing down. So as a whole, pricing for Asia, this is a global index compiled by Marsh globally, but in Asia as well, we follow a very similar trend. And Hong Kong and Singapore is the hub of reinsurance for Asia. And so a lot of international risks come here, and we are seeing double-digit increase, specifically for catastrophic exposed region. But even for non-nat cat exposed region, we are also seeing the increase. And one of the key factors, and this is very important for power as well, we are seeing a lack of competition. That means especially for complex risk, complex property program, and this is one of the key drivers that are driving the price increase. And when we bring it down to a local context, right? So obviously this increase is driven by the international reinsurers, and then we bring it down. Even in India insurance market, we are starting to see it being affected. It come on so fast, but insurers locally are getting more prudent in their risk selection and pricing, and now we have a strong focus on risk selection, on coverage they give, and limiting the exposure on their books in terms of higher deductibles and etc. So next slide. So that's the overall context globally, and we have this cycle, right, which we like to share with our clients, and the blue part is where we have the soft market, where the rates was going down constantly, and we have more capital coming into play, and what really happened in the last 16 quarters was that the losses, the premium is not stacking up to the losses that the insurers have to pay. They are losing money, and capacity starts to erode from insurers, and they feel that there's a need to justify the premium. And risk, in reality, the risk is also getting more complex. So now we are pushing up. The good thing is that a lot of clients asking, when can we go into the blue zone again? So as you can see here, we are saying that as of November, as of December as well, we are here in this place where is the rate rise strongly, it's a seller's market, but we believe we are slowly nudging our way towards the strong profit. But sadly, no one can ever predict what happens to the world. We have been a pandemic for 2 years. This is not really helping the industry as well. So really to see a change in the cycle is that we really need the insurers to start reaching a level of profitability. And so in order to do that, they are doing it by seeking to increase premium across their entire books, right? So for power, we are seeing average of 14 to 30% increase. I will go more details into the rates increase for various types of power technology in the next slide. One thing you don't want to have is that if you have a loss, you're going to have a punitive terms and condition. Expect very large increase on your renewal rates if you do have loss, and this is really how the markets is behaving. Markets are generally very conscious about catastrophic exposure. So loss-wise, actually 2021 was pretty okay in the first half of the year, but sadly in the last 2 months we have seen more loss coming in, particularly in coal-fired power plants. Slowly placement are normalizing. Capacity is coming back, but the main key thing is that we are not seeing enough lead. And just one point to make is that ESG is becoming a requirement. There will be always anger being sick on that. There will be question that they will ask with regards to your ESG principles before they can even start underwriting. So this is general context. So let me move on in the next slide a bit about the various power generation group and what's the impact. So we have here some of the risks that is placed by us in the Asia Power Hub. So we start off with coal. We have seen generally 66% as the average rate increase, but this takes in some conditions like losses. So if we normalize the rate increase, we're looking at about 29%, which is very high as well, right? So the main driver of this is because there is a reduction of capacity, basically, for coal, obviously due to obvious reason. And we see this happening as more insurers align themselves to the net zero underwriting. So for unabated coal plants and those on a very single small IPP with limited leverage, you're going to be taking most of this hit. So all placement now generally involve across various countries hub. That means we're normally not done alone. We get the involvement of London, Middle Eastern, European, and US capacity in order to reach 100%. And most of the major coal plants are no longer buying what we call full limit. So it's normally on a first loss limit, and we have sub-limits for CAT, and we also have higher retention. And one thing is that sadly, like I say, in the last quarter of this year, we are seeing more losses from coal plant. So we expect this trend to continue. So on the combined cycle, we're seeing about 17 to 19% kind of increase. It's a pretty stable environment. I think we don't have any much major losses. So therefore, more insurers are willing to quote lead. There's a bit more competition here. And the good thing is that I think there's also a bit of stabilization on the technology. We don't see any much change except for the H class, but the H class kind of what we call the more advanced technology is still a concern for insurers, and it tends to attract a higher deductibles. Hydroelectric is a big issue for the markets, right? All this stems from the big loss in Colombia. It's rumored to be about 1 billion. It's still ongoing, but you must understand a 1 billion loss for the market. It's a very big deal, and it will take them a long time to recover that. And the knee-jerk reaction stemming from that and other losses is that they really don't want, if they can, they don't want to touch hydro. So we are seeing a lack of appetite here. So the kind of increase is still high for renewal terms. Mixed power assets are really what we call the integrated power companies, which owns various assets, various IPPs, various types of across geographical zones, which they package into a program. So what you have here is a large premium pool, and they have a portfolio diversification. So this really helps to attract capacity. So if you are in a position to actually put all your power plants assets into a program, that would really help. And you can see that the kind of level of increase they get is slightly less, it's 14%, purely because of the bulk of the premium that they bring to the market, and also because of the optimization they can do their program in terms of leveraging the big assets that they have. Geothermal is really a small pool of business because there's not really that many, and and those that buy insurance are limited. But what we're also seeing is that there is less market interested in geothermal. And renewables while it's going to be on growing constantly, at least in the next foreseeable future, they are having also a lot high increase. We have 26% here on the average, because you must know, if you are early to these renewable games, when renewable come out, the insurance rate was so low, it's priced really inadequately. And so the market has been trying to push the rates up. The key concern is really still net cat exposure. But what is very different compared to the other asset classes is that there is a concern about technology, because insurers feel that the rate of innovation is moving too fast for them to understand, right? You must understand how the old traditional power market moves. A power GT model can be introduced, and it will take about 5 years to be common, you know. And now it's like for renewables, we are seeing new technology being introduced quarterly. So it's a really different ball game. And I think insurers are getting better in managing risk, but they can slowly improve. So we are ready. If you have to summarize, if you have claims, you have to really make sure you work in advance with your broker to manage your renewals. But if you are a clean account, I think next renewal, you're going to see the increased tapering off. If you're in coal plant, then I strongly encourage you to talk to your brokers early, right? To see how you can position yourself, because the capacity is limited. You want to make sure that you are in front of the queue of all the other coal plants to get whatever capacity is out there. And then there is a strong emphasis on some of the BI wordings, on cyber, and on other kind of non-physical damage business interruption triggers. We'll talk about more of my colleagues will talk more about this in the later presentation. So this is a general quick snapshot of the market from the Asia perspective. I'll just let Glenn share a bit more about some of the other developments we are seeing in markets.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. Look, I guess one of it's been mentioned a couple of times on this call already, but ESG, I think, is the three letters which are on every board's lips and minds at the moment. And one of the impacts that it's having, I guess, for the insurance market is what we call net zero underwriting, which is really, the insurer's commitment to delivering, net zero greenhouse gas emissions in terms of their underwriting portfolios. So, what they're trying to do is to, match what the world is doing effectively in terms of, focusing on carbon. And quite a number of insurers have stopped, or refusing to insure new thermal coal risks, including Lloyd's, who have recommended, to their members to stop writing coal from the 1st of January. With COP26 just concluded, a number of insurers are reviewing their positions. We're expecting to see more commitments coming out from various insurers on this. But aside from looking to achieve, this net zero underwriting, I mean, every insurer is focused on ESG. And I think, what we're seeing is that nowadays when we try to approach the insurance market for terms, almost every insurer wants to understand the position of a client's ESG. And it doesn't mean that they have to be necessarily, a coal-fired power station. They can be gas, they can be hydro. It doesn't really matter. It's now not just about the E, it's also about the S and the G. But what I think what we're also seeing, and maybe if we could just flip to the next slide, is just a little bit of inconsistency in the market. And the issue that we face at the moment is that there are various different approaches being taken by the insurance market in terms of determining how they approach net zero underwriting and how they approach ESG. There's no consistency. And I think until such time as we get to a point where there is this consistent approach around, well, how do you determine a company's ESG position? We're going to be in a little bit of a tough position because, we can't approach the insurance market on a consistent basis. And in fact, I'm not sure if it's been spoken about already, but one of the ways that Marsh has looked to address this is by coming up with our own ESG risk ranking tool. All right, which is a tool that we look at, which we've developed across various different the various different frameworks that are available out there to measure ESG, to bring some consistency around how you measure that. So I think that is a first step. I think in trying to get a clearer position in terms of how ESG is viewed. And I think that the insurance market needs to come to a landing on how they view this, and it will take some time. But I think certainly this risk ranking tool that Marsh has developed is a great first step. So to then on to the next slide to talk about where we are in terms of the operational power market outlook. Ben's already mentioned, that things are showing signs of stabilization. And it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, but we say that the insurance market is sunny with a chance of thunderstorms. And that's really Singapore's weather every day. But what we're trying to say here is that it's very difficult to forecast what the market's going to do. But what we've seen over the last 6 to 12 months is a stabilization in terms of market supply. Because in the end of the day, market supply is what drives the competitiveness of the insurance market. So with that stabilization of supply, we should then see a steadying of the rate increases. Now, we're putting out an estimate here between 5 to 10% for loss-free business, and I'm talking about here more of your combined cycle gas turbines and the mixed power assets that Ben mentioned earlier on. Coal will still continue to face some challenges, but I think even there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Now, it's a very distant light, but what we are seeing is that there are some noises from new capacity. Now, it may take some time for that capacity to come to fruition. Some of the mutuals are talking about, maybe extending their offerings. We have seen a couple of new startups. The position with Lloyd isn't finite in terms of their position. There are still members that can look to participate in coal. So, we're optimistic, I guess is the word that I would use in terms of pricing for coal, but it is still going to be very, very challenging. Insurers are trying to take advantage of the position that there is this massive lack of supply. Hydro too, is still challenging for the very reasons that Ben mentioned. We're going to see one of the biggest, issues that we see with the market at the moment. Whilst there may be, the stabilization of capacity, one of the issues that we have is a lack of insurers who are actually willing to offer alternative lead terms. So if we don't have markets competing against each other to offer lead terms, then it's very, very difficult to create competition. Just a quick fact, I mean, over the last 3 years, in terms of the business placed into Singapore, I could probably say that 98% of placements have been retained with the existing lead insurer market. So it goes to show that not many insurers have actually, or many clients have moved lead insurers over the past few years. Natural catastrophe is still an issue for insurers, and that will continue. There's still going to be a continuation and strong focus on technical pricing. We will start to see some interest in long-term agreements. So that's LTAs in the slide here. Long-term agreements will start to come back in slowly, which to me usually indicates that the market is starting to get to that position of stabilization and potentially, more competitive market as well. There will be focus, the insurers are still focused on risk management, but one area that they will be focused on is, the impacts of COVID-19 and delayed maintenance, because a lot of clients have put off maintenance or, major outages to be able to get the right technical support, OEM support to those outages. And you can't just keep putting these things off. So insurers will be very interested to know, what's happened in terms of those delayed maintenances. And as I mentioned, ESG is the 3 letters on every insurer's lips, and they want to understand exactly what clients are doing in that space. And as Ben mentioned, unfortunately, accounts with large losses, poor performance will still be very challenged in the market ahead. So, Gautam, I'll hand over to you now to give a perspective. And I should have said, guys, this is really the international reinsurance market that we're talking about here. So I know it is very different in India, and I'll hand over to Gautam to take you through the Indian insurance market.
Oh, thank you, Ben and Glenn. I think Indian market is also not very different from how the global markets are responding. And we have seen, as power sector clients and power sector insurance, we have seen the rate rising or stabilizing in the last few years. In 2019, the GIC of India came up with a treaty change, and that is the IIB tariff now, which we are saying already introduced. The rates are pretty much higher compared to 2018 terms. But yes, that's the reality of the market. Currently, this is what the domestic underwriting markets are facing, and we have very limited options to be created from the international markets. As Ben and Glenn just mentioned, the rates are even higher there. This is on the thermal coal. When we talk about hydro in India, has particularly seen large losses. We had a recent glacial outburst event in the northern part of India, Uttarakhand, and then everything changed again. When markets are still looking for reduction in hydro, this one event changed the entire perception again. we are seeing a rate rise in the hydro again for the coming year. On the terrorism side, as Glenn was mentioning about the net zero, insurance alliance and similar of that sort, they've already decided that from Jan 1 onwards, they are not taking any new, thermal coal-based power plant on the terrorism front. So they'll, with the limited markets coming in, we see the rates to be, further going up in a manner. So as mentioned, Glenn mentioned about, less of competition, more of market monopoly, more of rate rise. So that is what the global market scenario and similarly the situation currently in India that we are facing. But we are, in a very steady way, we are working towards creating some innovative solution for our clients, which some of which we have already discussed in our previous chapter about the parametrics. And just taking a clue from ESG that Glenn mentioned about the ESG ratings. Yes, Marsh have already introduced the ESG rating tool, and also in India we are working with few of our clients on the ESG rating. And what we have seen while we are discussing during the roadshow with our global reinsurance partners, they are requesting a lot of details around ESG. So probably going forward, we will also look forward to making the ESG rating as done by Marsh part of the underwriting submission. So with this, I just handed over the slides to Stephanie to take you through the large losses, followed by Sandeep.
Thank you, Gautam. So if we can move to the slide of global losses, the Marsh team gathers loss data from internal and external sources, going through the industry press, talking to markets and loss adjusters.
So Stephanie,
Sorry, there's a poll question first.
Now we have a poll question here.
How do you define a loss adjuster? That's something I'm very interested to see. So an independent fact checker, a decision maker on whether the loss will be covered by insurers, or a bit of both. I think there's a clue. Yep. I'd say I'll give you the answer a bit later, but thank you for that. So going through the next two slides, a summary of some of the largest losses globally and in Asia, and of interest to the market. First one is in Australia. It's a Collide coal power plant. It is not a Marsh account, so we do not know the inside and out of the details. However, it was all over the media, so it cannot be avoided. And it blacked out 500,000 homes in North Queensland, with a return to service scheduled on the 1st of December 2022. So there's a huge impact on the indemnity period, and whether it was long enough, I don't know, since we didn't place it. And we don't know what insurers would be reserving, but it would be hundreds of millions. The plant is run by a Queensland government-owned corporation called CS Energy. And interestingly, and also very relevant to the discussion later on, CS Energy confirmed a week ago that it was hit by a ransomware attack. The company said the incident occurred on its corporate network, but has not impacted electricity generation. But it continues to generate and dispatch electricity. And they said that they contained the ransomware attack by segregating the corporate network from other internal networks and enacting business continuity processes. So I thought it was very relevant to mention that. The next loss is in South Africa. And the news articles report a repair of around $136 million. The Medupi coal fire generating station was owned and operated by Eskom and suffered a severe explosion in a steam generator. The generator was being degassed to remove hydrogen to allow maintenance. Hydrogen is replaced with carbon dioxide gas, and then the carbon dioxide is replaced with air. It is understood that a deviation from the procedure was for carrying out this activity allowed air and hydrogen to mix to form the explosive mixture. The next two events are in the Middle East, and they're quite significant. One was a gas turbine flashover, and the other a steam turbine. And finally, the Caribbean loss was a hurricane damage, so NatCat. Several claims were combined here because they were all contingency, loss of revenue, and that was due to the inability of the grid to supply the power needed for the site to operate. And then the Colombia loss was a technical failure caused the fire to rip through the powerhouse, which was situated 400 meters underground, causing critical damage to 4 oil-spilled power cable circuits that conveyed the generated power from the plant to the outside world. Next slide, we have the Philippines. Damage to a boiler structure. It is a coal-fired fired power plant. Thailand, damage to gas turbine. Very interestingly, Marsh advocacy was involved in that. It was a mismatch of incompatible Siemens and Saldo tiles and tile holders installed in gas turbine combustion section cores, causing the tile to become liberated and falling. And so there was a significant recovery from the OEM. So the reserve actually moved from 80 million to about 40 million. The transformer damage is also a Marsh success. The claim settlement was $124 million with completed with less than a year to go. So, within a year, we actually got a claim settlement. The Marsh claims team was able to negotiate and obtain insurers' approval to purchase a spare transformer. So it needed a replacement transformer, and we convinced insurer to purchase 2 in case there was any delays in getting the first transformer back to the insured, and that's because the BI values were $500 a day. So that was a very good decision. The second loss in Indonesia is not so large, but I thought it was very relevant to put in the pack because it was actually the replacement transformer of the $124 million claim, which failed. But due to the actions that we had taken in the first claim, the replacement took no time at all, and therefore the interruption was minimal. So only $8 million paid. Only, I say. The Philippines is a typhoon, so the insured reinstated the hills surrounding the geothermal plant with improved design landscaping. This created arguments that whilst this was good risk management, it was also not rectification of damage and therefore not covered. The Marsh claims team was able to negotiate a participation of insurers towards the cost of the landscaping, but we argued that it was a necessary element of reinstating the pipeline, which had been damaged by the landslide. So I put this last, as a weather events, but landslides are definitely very much more common as claims, and they're very, very, very challenging. So next slide, please. So dealing with major losses is a complex business, and unless you have had the experience of being involved in a claim, it can be like navigating a foreign country without speaking the language. So in every claim, you have to satisfy 3 criteria: cause, policy cover, quantum. Quantum being how much you will end up in the end and receive from insurer. Insurers appoint independent experts to determine the cause. When the cause is unclear, when they want to actually confirm coverage, and when they feel that an exclusion might be applying, like wear and tear or inappropriate use outside the manufacturer's recommendations. And then they will assess that with together with coverage. So late notification is never a good thing. You know, and we need to also, you need to also check the competence of the experts appointed, and the interpretation of the policy language and the inadequacy possibly of sums insured. So the answer to the poll question, you know, the loss adjuster is supposed to be an impartial investigator, but don't forget that he is paid by insurer. And, you know, whilst he's not meant to report on policy coverage issues, everything you say, he will actually report back to insurer and use it to down adjust the claim, to, you know, adjust the claim downwards. And they will have the benefit of, you know, forensic expert, forensic accountant, and forensic delay specialist, which are very expensive experts. And you know, you're alone trying to battle all of these experts. So my one advice is communication is the single most important key to settling claims successfully. And communicate with our team. You know, our advocacy and forensic expertise can really help you level the playing field with insurers. The claim solution team at Marsh can step in and work with you when you have large and complex losses, especially when your team doesn't have time and when your team is not familiar with insurers' requirement or technology. In large losses, the team can bring a value as claims preparer as well. So your policy wording will always almost have a claims preparation clause, which says that insurer will pay your costs to prepare the claim. So why would you not avail yourself of the services of your own team of experts? Because insurers certainly do so. I will give you an example which happened only this week. Insurers argued no root cause analysis, no payment on account for a replacement compressor for a gas turbine. And our client had already found a replacement compressor and actually negotiated a really good price at $10 million. We argued that you know, sending the damaged compressor back to GE in the US for a root cause analysis was unnecessary and time wasting, and also would cost $400,000 to the insurer. So insurers weighed the pros and cons of that, and actually, since the policy wording was very broad, they accepted that, you know, we could go ahead with the replacement compressor without a root cause analysis, and they are paying for it. So that was a very, very successful, you know, we've got $10 million within 3 months of the loss happening. And my last point is that, you know your business best, but we have handled many, many claims globally, and we can help you maximize your recovery from insurers. So my colleague Sandeep will now go through some large losses in India.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie. So I'll just hold the baton from you now and move forward. So so basically at Marsh, we have got quite a lot loss data with us. So we just analyzed those loss data and just tried to bifurcate the various losses we had. So major bifurcation between the heads of machinery breakdown, weather and aging and human factor error, we can see 37% out of the total losses are attributable because of the machinery breakdown. Now, when we say machinery breakdown, these are basically sudden and accidental breakdowns which are there in the plant. Human error or human factor basically is there during the operation of the plant and during even the construction of the plant also. Suppose a welder makes mistake in the construction, that also goes into that. So that takes around 30%, 16% weather and atmosphere. Others are 12%, which will necessarily have, you know, losses because of the fire, because of pilferage, because of the, you know, some of the transportation losses, and aging is attributed to 5%. Now, if you will just see this bifurcation equipment wise, we can see that turbines have got 36%, the largest chunk out of the maximum losses. 13% is attributed to generators, 12% to transformers, 1%, though it is low, but when it happens, it is substantial. We will see some of the loss examples in slides to come. Others are attributed to 38% of the losses. So others will have necessarily the balance of plant equipment, for example, coal handling plants, ash handling plant, some of the other utilities. So basically that consists of 38% of the total losses. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is the first case which I just want to discuss is regarding the boiler explosion. So we can just see the amount of loss here. It is 2,500 million INRs, causing 16 months of outage. So we just go to the probable root cause and the sequence of events which are responsible for that. So it started with the bottom ash handling system failure. So it was not working properly. Simultaneously, the ash started rising up and the clinkers and the ash which was falling to the bottom ash just struck with the bottom ash panel or water wall panel, causing boiler tube leakage. So it was a huge boiler tube leakage, causing flashing of steam within a span of few seconds, which pressurized the first pass, and simultaneously it took the unburnt hydrocarbon to the back pass. So when the unburnt hydrocarbon reached to the back pass, it found source of ignition there and ignited, and there was a huge explosion at the back pass. And the front pass, because of the flashing of steam, it got pressurized and there was a huge damage. So it is basically explosion in front and back pass. So what are the various learnings out of this? We can conclude. First and foremost is the bottom ash handling system is the key. We need to see on the continuous basis the ash levels in the bottom ash hopper. We need to see whether the jet pumps are working or not, the clinker grinders are working or not, the flap gates are open or not. So I think the plant guys, definitely will be in agreement with me pertaining to all these jargons. But yes, we need to maintain bottom ash hopper to the level fullest. If I talk about safety interlock, yeah, these are first and foremost requirements. That is FSSS, that is furnace safeguard and supervisory systems. So we need to have the boiler draft protections in place. The boiler, basically the drum level controls in place. We need to have the protections like, the purging of the boiler, the flame scanner, sensitivity, all these things has to be in place for the safe operation of the boiler. Next case. Yeah, this pertains to the steam turbine and generator. So it is basically a typical scenario, I would say, wherein the lube oil piping has got flanges. There is a leak in the flange, which finds a heated surface at the below levels. That heated surface may be of HP pipelines or MS steam, basically critical pipings. And because of the high temperature, skin temperature of the piping, that oil can get ignited and then subsequently damaged. So here also it happened. So that oil was ignited, causing fire at the generator, basically bearing end, wherein the hydrogen seal was damaged, hydrogen was released, and it was a big explosion there. So the learnings again, basically the piping construction. So it is basically a design phase thing, which needs to be taken care. But if it is not there, we have solutions for that. We can have the flange guards in place that will retain the oil leakage inside at all. So it will not allow the oil to come out of the pipe. Second thing we can do is, to constantly check the insulation of the critical piping so that we should not get any higher temperature surfaces below the turbine floor. So these are the two main things which we can take care. Third slide. Okay, this is again pertaining to the steam turbine generators. So it is basically a failure of DC system. So that's why we always see that a good design will have one working and one standby 220 volt DC system, which is last line of defense in the event of extreme emergencies. So basically in this case, the DC system failed the digital electro-hydraulic controller of the turbine was out of the supply. Turbine got tripped, and because of the turbine tripping, the AC and DC, the whole system went out. The unit was in unit blackout condition. Turbine got seized, and the rest is the history. So a lot of issue happened thereafter. So the key learning is we have to have the DC system intact all the time. Standby DC system is the key here. Proper testing of DC system, because many times we have observed that at site they have one working and one standby DC system, but when the requirement comes, the standby DC system is not coming into play. So here the testing will play a major role. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, this is again basically the steam turbine. We saw that 36% of the losses in the beginning are pertaining to steam turbines. So the steam turbines are going to be there on the loss slides. So this is basically pertaining to high cycle fatigue of LP turbine. So what really happened is, because of the flow conditions, the non-harmonic vibrations, which are also called stalled flutter kind of vibrations, that came to the last stage LP turbine blades, and because of that particular vibration, there was a heavy loss in the LP turbine. It caused around 19 crores, the machinery breakdown, and business interruption loss was also to the tune of 230 millions. So basically, the key learning here is to have natural frequency test at each and every major overhaul. This will let you know the natural frequencies of each of the LP turbine stage blades. You can do a proper tuning out of that and configure or place your LP turbine blades so that these kind of phenomena don't occur. So that is basically the key learning out of this particular loss. Then the plant water chemistry also plays an important role. So it will avoid unnecessary deposits on this the turbine blades, which can cause corrosion pittings followed by surface cracks and domestic object damages. So that is also considered to be the key. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the combined cycle plant. This is gas turbine loss, which I'm talking about. It is hot gas path loss. So basically, it amounts to be 280 crores. Outage was 4 months. So basically, this is pertaining to the blockage of air bleed holes, which are there on the gas turbine blades. So there was issue with the strainers. So the bleed air was taken out of the compressor and it was passed through the strainer so that unwanted debris are removed. But because the strainer was not there initially, so debris went to the hot gas path blades there, blocked the cooling air pathways, and then there was the peeling of the thermal barrier coating on the gas turbine blades, and finally there was an erosion and it was a big loss. So we observed that there were some technical information letters released from OEM to take care about this particular scenario, but client avoided that. So the learnings obviously are implementation of TILs and CSBs, which are being regularly released by OEM. Gas quality monitoring is again a big crucial thing. Regular combustion inspections, HGPIs and major inspections, these are also quite an important thing. Yeah, next please. Yeah, this is basically the boiler again. So it is a general boiler tube leakage. So we can see that the improvements in plant water chemistry, regular monitoring of tube thickness and regular soot blowing. These are the key things which can be in place to minimize these losses. Next, please. Yeah. So one loss we took about the hydropower plant, and it is the overspeeding of turbine. So what really happened was that, because of the tripping from grid conditions, the MIVs were supposed to be closed. Those got closed also, but because the passing through MIVs, your hydro turbine got oversped and there was a huge loss. So basically the key learnings out of that is turbine MIV and IGV exercising on regular basis. the passing tests should be done on regular basis so that we are confident about the equipment. Yeah, next please. Yeah, this is again the poll question we have. Yeah, after going through all these losses which we discussed, what we think, how prepared we are. So there are 4 alternates. Wow. So we are prepared, but I'll just try to bridge this gap between fully prepared and prepared. So I will just take you through the risk engineering aspect of our deliverable or value added thing, which I just want to discuss. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as we saw in the loss slides that either there are unprotected hazardous areas where we don't have any fixed fire protection systems or we don't have protections in place. Protections, when I say these are basically the equipment protections as well. Or we have inadequate operations. Either we don't include the testing practices, that is protection testing practices, or we have inadequate maintenance practice. Either we don't do that or we don't do as the OEMs are prescribing. So there is a gap there. Now, how do we do risk engineering? What are the basis? We have codes and standards in place. We have NFPA codes, FM data sheets, IEEE codes. So we take help of these codes and try to see that where the current site conditions are with respect to these codes and try to find out the gaps. Then we compare the current plants and processes with the world's benchmarking practices and try to see the gaps there, or learning from losses. As we discussed so many losses, we have got a good level of database with us. We compare the existing plant and practices with respect to the losses and then the learnings. So what are the basic pillars of risk engineering? Basically hardware system. So it has got the various areas which are already listed there, which has got plant layouts, credentials, engineering standards, etc. Then we have management systems. So these are driven by management. So that's why we can see that, loss control policies, ergonomics, and operability of the plant. And then finally, we have emergency response systems. Next, please. Okay, so this is the process. So we do a thorough review of existing plant and processes. So which has necessarily got hardware system management and emergency response system. We do the gap analysis. We issue the recommendations, and then we issue the world-class survey report that is acceptable across world markets, support in implementation of recommendations, and there are various trainings for loss prevention and issuance of some leadership material as well. Next, please. Yeah, this is one of the deliverables we have. That is basically the inspection deep dive. So if we have come across some of the shortcomings at site, we go deep into that and we try to find out solutions and issue a separate report to the site. Next, please. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you. Yeah, Gautam, over to you.
Yes, so thank you, Stephanie and Sandeep, on dwelling on losses. Now we'll just quickly have a review from our claims head, Mr. Siddharth Patnaik, on during the claims why underinsurance and valuation becomes very critical for our reinstatement and the claim payout. Siddharth, sir.
Thank you, Gautam. Am I audible?
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Gautam, as well. In the interest of time, probably I would not elaborate much, but just coming straight on to the point. When we talk about large claims and large losses and learning from the losses, the most important thing is that how much are we really recovering through the losses? And if there is a claim which is reported to the insurance companies. And as you might see here, in this particular slide, we have tried to put across some of the key concerns as a claim goes through its own assessment cycle through a loss adjuster, payment through insurance by the insurance companies. But what are those key issues? One of the most significant one that we see is the underinsurance impact. Almost 70% of the claims that are settled in market see some kind of impact due to inadequacy of cover sought in the policy. Again, the inadequacy of cover or the sum insured taken in the policy not being as per the risk at the site from an insurance perspective. That is what is the conceptual thing. When we talk about the risk and its value, which is to be covered in the policy, the most important thing is the reinstatement valuation. So if this same property is to be reinstated at the same site post a loss, what are those expenses that you are incurring, which could be very different from other valuations, that is from a banking perspective, solvency perspective, or from your book value perspective. So this is one important thing that one must bear in mind. And of course, there could be a choice in terms of being consciously self-insured, or there could be a kind of ignorance that I miss out on this. But second is very alarming in a sense that if you look at the first point here, understanding of risk accumulation and linking adequacy of probable maximum exposure during the policy period, this has a wider ramification over a period of time. Because unless we know the risk accumulation and what could be the probable maximum exposure, because the rating and the reserving and all those kind of risk management at the insurance company's end, or even at the reinsurance market, it is all dependent on this. So probably somewhere as an industry together, we should always be ideally looking at adequate valuation being put forth for a coverage and for analysis, of course, for rating purpose. When we talk about, and this is from an overall property insurance perspective, and of course, when it comes to the business interruption, probably this, there the indemnity period duration is one of the areas. And aside that, in fact, on this point, we'll be dwelling further in the next slide. And as we talk about the key concern areas in the policy, we wanted to also highlight that sometimes we had taken a poll. In fact, we did a survey with the loss adjusters, and the response from the adjusters was that the coverage clarity is the key issue. The market is flooded with multiple wordings, and sometimes some wordings is appropriate for a particular market may not be appropriate for Indian market. So it is very important that what wording are we choosing and what implication it has in the context of your industry or your sector. That is something one needs to evaluate very closely. And of course, as a corollary of that, when there is a claim, there is always a debate. And of course, it becomes a double whammy because the loss, when it strikes, obviously it's a problem. And if there are further complications in terms of policy interpretations, policy coverages, it is again far more difficult. As we know, the market is pretty conservative when it comes to payment of claims. To the next slide, please. So just touching upon a few high-level points. As I said, the idea is to dwell on the sum insured being adequate or a kind of coverage. If there is a kind of underinsurance, there should be a conscious decision, not something which is not in your radar, that you don't know how much is the exposure and how much are you really covering through insurance. So first is, of course, the civil structures. So for a typical assessment of adequacy of coverage and the risk that should be, sum insured that should be taken in the policy. Usually, a detailed estimate on BOQ, the bill of quantity, that is also a kind of standard method. And of course, the plinth area, overall area, etc., of the civil structures, and again, extrapolating the value thereof. That is another method. And machinery is, of course, supplier's quotation is the very well accepted reference for valuation at the time of loss. And original purchase price escalated to the indices. That is also another method that they use. And original capitalized cost escalate, the purchase cost of similar machines in the same type and same capacity, if it is done recently, that is also another reference. And of course, the cost of new machines, if it is an improved version, then obviously it has to be adjusted for the improvement that you are having because of the additional features that machine provides. That needs to be adjusted because insurance operates on the principle that as it was on the date of loss. So these are the typical references in terms of knowing what exactly loss adjusters or the insurance companies look for asset valuation references to measure the coverage adequacy. So if we are really having this kind of references at the outset of the policy, that becomes easier for us to know exactly what asset that I'm covering and its value, and how much am I taking in the insurance, how much of sum insured I'm opting for in the insurance policy. And of course, when it comes to business interruption coverage, the most important point is the indemnity duration. We have seen some of the large losses where the indemnity duration could be as long as 16, 18 months, or it could be more than that. And then, of course, what is that, when we opt for a business interruption cover or a sum insured for business interruption cover, the length of indemnity period is not only important, but what point of measure that you are taking. That if your policy indemnity in a policy is for 1 year and the loss strikes on the last day of your policy, the indemnity period of 18 months starts from the last day of the policy. So is my business projection that I made for my business interruption cover is based on this principle. So these are the important elements that I must have in my reference while opting for business interruption cover. And of course, insurance, the gross profit that usually for which you recover in the event of a loss, again from insurance context, has certain elements. So probably this is one area where Marsh is fully equipped. It has a full-fledged forensic advisory and consulting team who can really advise you and help you to determine the sum insured value. So, and while fixing the sum insured, then there are other challenges that we must really keep in our mind. Basis of indemnity provided in the policy, that is something which is whether it is a reinstatement value or a market value or actual cash value. So all these three things operate in a different logic pattern. So in fact, they have their own dynamics. So one has to understand that if I'm opting for any of these methods for final indemnity to be paid out by insurance company, which is the one which benefits me the best, and a proper valuation of for insurance purpose, of course, we talked about it. And the most critical thing is about the old established plans is that you don't have much of references over there. Here, it could be a big issue. And in fact, here, one would suggest that a proper valuation has to be done by certified agencies, where we can also help to identify the right kind of agency who can really support you or say help you to work out what should be the justifiable or reasonable sum insured. Obsolescence sometimes is a big issue in terms of valuation, and there the indemnity, sometimes it becomes a part of the policy coverage, but probably if it is obsolete and then when the claim comes, it becomes a big debate point as regards what is the adequate indemnity. Technological improvements, we just spoke about it, and it always gets adjusted. And if there is a technological improvement and there are certain other improvements that we are talking about, which is involuntary, and because of the by law or regulation you have to do it, then of course there are coverages for that. And of course, in terms of BI, sum insured, what one keep in mind is that the key critical equipment and their availability, the spare availability, the vendor arrangement for supplies, even to the tier 1, tier 2, maybe the last end suppliers, Then geographical location, that is also equally important. And sometimes what I have missed out is that if there is second-hand machinery, which is at the outset itself, I have installed second-hand machinery or a refurbished plant, the valuation thereof. That could be also a very critical component that one must bear in mind. And these are the factors which really has a bearing on the policy, fixing the sum insured, and probably an expert could, a valuation expert could really assist on all these aspects. And again, the idea is to have your coverage value that you have taken under the policy adequately examined, scrutinized, and that there is no surprises over there when there is a major loss. As we know, the frequency of losses have gone up due to NatCat events that we have been talking so much in the recent days, and of course in this program itself. And there is just one case study that which talks about certain exceptional situations, which is not covered in the content that I spoke about earlier, is that this is an instance of a hydroelectric project where there was a, it virtually river changed its course. You have to install the same plant at a different location, or the same power station at a different location. This is also very common to power T&D lines. We have seen ample number of times on the riverbed and the hilly terrain, or even otherwise also, once there is a major loss or a kind of impact due to some kind of natural event, probably the same location becomes redundant. You have to re-erect, and the whole re-erection involves a lot of cost, which is not purely material cost, but it is designing and a lot of experts getting engaged, which is almost a kind of starting again from ground zero. So probably this is where you need to be very cautious about what kind of challenges that, or the exposures that you have, and probably fixing the sum insured based on the kind of exposures that you have. Probably some of them as unique as with the case that we discussed about. One needs to be very mindful of this, and probably Marsh as a broker, and with the kind of experience and exposure that we have and the learnings that we have from the industry, could be best positioned to help you and guide you to have the adequate cover. So that's from me, and I hand back to Gautam.
Thank you, Siddharth sir. Now on the emerging risk, cyber and environmental impairment, I would like to call upon Reshma Maheshwari, our cyber leader. Reshma.
Thank you, Gautam, and thank you everyone for being so patient. I know it's the final session of this presentation. I will keep it very short and crisp, and give enough time for question and answers if there are any. So yes, from the physical world to the digital world, we move, like the pandemic has, moved us from face-to-face meetings to these webinars. Similarly, power sector has seen immense growth when it comes to digitization, technological innovation. So obviously, when we talk about, there are enough people who have spoken about the physical risk related to the power sector. What I'm going to talk about specifically is the cyber risk. While I'm the last, but I'm sure these risks are not the least, because they have become the top agenda items for most of the power and utility companies. We all know that there's no denying of the fact that digitization and the opportunities which has brought along with it for the power and utility companies are immense. There are limitless advantages which this digitization brought for the power and utility companies. But what it has already also brought with them is an increased threat of cyber attack. In fact, you'll be surprised to know that the power sector is one of the most frequented target for cyber attacks across the world. It's not only in India, but it's the phenomena across the world. Power sector is also the first one to respond because some of the mandatory cyber controls are already in place. But the risk is evolving so fast, and cyber threat vectors have become so sophisticated that this particular risk is something which is, as I said, is the top agenda item for most of the firms. Now, what are the threats arising out of cyber attack? We have all seen blackouts during, a few months back. There was a blackout in Mumbai. There was there was a threat, while it was a blackout, but we have heard New York Times reported it as a cyber attack on one of the power companies in Bombay. We have also seen some examples wherein cyber attacks have led to property damages, fire and explosion. Obviously, it is a health and safety, related exposure also when there is an explosion or a fire kind of an event. Uh, Big business interruption losses have happened. We've all heard about the Colonial Pipeline issue where that firm had to pay ransomware, and also the business was down for a few days. So yes, business interruption is a risk. Technology liability. The businesses have become so interconnected that any stoppage of work at your end may lead to disruption of the overall businesses. Threat vectors understand that if they have to cripple an economy, the best way to do it is to attack power sector companies, because everyone is work. So if power is down, you have your financial services won't work, your telecommunication services won't work, the population will be incommunicado, there'll be stoppage of work. So it can completely cripple the economy, and there can be liabilities on the power and sector companies, and obviously supply chain and transportation will get affected because of these cyber attacks. Now moving forward, next slide please. We all know that the companies are going digitized, and there are no two ways about it, that the firms will have to go that way, because most of the work is now being done through the IoTs or the internet embedded devices. Now companies are using electric transmissions to run their networks. The SCADA systems, the ICS systems are completely run by computers. There is a convergence between IT and OT, and that's creating more issues for the companies when it comes to larger surfaces, when it comes to cyber attacks. Utility companies are also now dependent on more data network to manage facilities. There are more and more data is being pushed towards cloud service providers. More companies are moving towards a hybrid kind of data storage as well. Utility relying on data network to manage the grid. The concept of smart grid has come in a big way. The grids are becoming smarter, but we all know that this also comes up with its own kind of attack. There are more routes of attacks which hackers have identified because of these risks. Utility companies are using more digital technologies for evacuation, provisioning, production, and a lot of other activities. And all this is resulting into more and more sophisticated attacks, which we have seen in the recent past. When we look at how the attacks have evolved, and the next slide we'll be talking about some of those. We have all heard about the viruses like the Shodan, the Stuxnet, the Shamoon kind of attacks, but those are the things of past as of now. What we have seen is the attacks have evolved from IT to OT. More and more cyber attackers are now getting into the ICS systems of the firm and trying to create some kind of a sabotage to the system, some kind of nation state actors getting involved and trying to disrupt the economies of the firm. So while from 2014 to 2021, we have seen a lot of attacks. Some of them we have mentioned here. It's the 2015 Ukrainian power grid attack. Everyone is aware about how it impacted almost 80,000 energy customers of Ukraine, and after that there was NotPetya, which again started with Ukraine and then impacted the whole world like never before. The ransomware attack. Then there was hacked pipeline communications in the US, which again 7 gas pipelines were attacked, and there was a lot of impact when it comes to their customers. Communication lines broke down, so a lot of impact there. Then we had our own in India, the Mumbai power outage, as I spoke about, while no one has confirmed as yet, but New York Times reported that it was a handiwork of a cyber attacker. We have all seen that people who are in Mumbai, we have seen power cuts, stoppage of work, trains stopped running during that time. So yes, the economy does get crippled. Then there was this Telangana SDLC attack again, where 40 substations of the SDLCs were affected. And there have been enough and more attacks like that, which are happening day in, day out. The other factor which is impacting the power and utility factors is also the groups which are targeting the power sectors are also increasing in numbers, from 87 in the 2015, 2016 era to almost 155 and counting in the 2020, 2021. one trend which is coming across is that what we have been hearing and reading about is the nation and state actors are joining hands with some of these organized criminals to ensure that there are attacks, and then they can deny the complete the attack. I mean their involvement. So that's one of the factors which is impacting the power sectors a lot, and obviously Russia, China, I mean they are the ones who have been behind a lot of such attacks. Is something which has been alleged. Yeah, moving on. Now, when there is a cyber event, what is considered as a cyber event? It can be both, external as well as internal. It can be a malicious attack. Someone is trying to intrude into your systems, whether it's IT or OT. It can be an accidental event, or it can be a pure human error from your own employee or a disgruntled employee trying to sabotage some of these systems. So this is considered to be a cyber event. And what a cyber event results into, the impact of a cyber event, obviously the direct impact will be all non-physical, because there will be issues related to data confidentiality. The data can go out. There will be issues related to the non-availability of the network. In ransomware, most of the times the data is not available. You're not able to work when the data gets encrypted, and there's non-availability of network. Now, that non-physical aspect then results into a physical damage to the overall infrastructure. So that direct impact will always be non-physical, but that non-physical impact will result into a physical kind of an impact, which may turn into a property damage in some of the cases where we have seen that there have been actual impact on the property as well, and there can be bodily injury as well. If there is a property damage, there is always a chance of a bodily injury. So that's the impact. And then that impact results into the consequences, which can lead losses and claims related to loss of income. If there's a business interruption loss, definitely companies will lose income because they're not able to produce. Then there'll be first party costs related to forensics, related to figuring out what has gone wrong, how to plug the hole. In case of a data leakage, there can be regulatory and other third party related costs. There can be fines and penalties associated to the data breaches. There can be extortion demand, which has become the most common kind of cyber attack these days. For example, the Colonial Pipeline event, which I've spoken about. What we have read in the public domain is the firm paid $4.3 million as ransom to the cyber threat vector. Some of it has been recovered, but we don't know the actual losses. But that's become the most common type of cyber attack these days. There can be negligence in services, as I said, because a lot of firms depend on power and utility firms as critical infrastructure, and there can be services negligence in services related to an attack on your plants or your systems. And obviously, all this can result into shareholder litigations, which we have seen has become very, very common in some of the more developed economies like US and other North American and European countries. So yes, that's the consequence. And now we talk about what is the solution which is available, or another kind of loss which we have started seeing happening very frequently these days is the social engineering fraud, which is nothing but an imposter trying to impersonate as a employee or a vendor or a client or a customer of the firm, and they have fraudulently induced the money. We have seen enough and more cases like this. India's largest oil and gas company was impacted by such kind of events. It was in the public domain. They lost almost 197 crores related to a social engineering loss. And there have been enough and more cases which we have started seeing. While this is more of a white collar fraud, but again, the perpetrators use computers or systems or man in the middle kind of attacks to ensure that the funds get transferred to the wrong accounts or accounts related to the threat vectors. That is another risk which we are seeing directly associated with more digitization of the power and utility firms. Now, talking about the risk, we move on to the solution. The solution is definitely in a cyber insurance policy, which is kind of a package policy. It has different sections in that because there are losses are also into different kind of. So if there is a cyber attack, or if there is a cyber loss, definitely the company will suffer multiple aspects. One will be the first party costs, which they will have to immediately bear, but it can also result into property damage. It can also result into business interruption. It can result into fines and penalties. It can result into third party litigations. So similarly, considering all those aspects, the policy has been designed in a way that it covers both the first party expenses, which will largely mean how do you manage the event, how if there is a business interruption loss of profit, that gets covered under the policy. Your systems are down, you're not able to produce. That's a classic loss. Very similar to your fire loss of profit or loss of profit under a mega policy or a IAR. Then there is cyber extortion or ransomware. It covers both the data restoration cost. It also covers ransomware if the company chooses to pay so. It also covers the ensuing business interruption loss if the company decides not to pay but to restore the data on itself. So that's covered, and data restoration as a cost also gets covered under the policy. Those are the first party coverages. On the third party side, the policy will cover the privacy liability, the data which you store for your customers. Largely, this is more relevant for distribution companies. So, the data which you store for your customers, if that goes out, there is always a possibility that there can be a lawsuit against you for from those data subjects. Now that is covered under the policy. It also covers network security liability, which means that someone using your systems, vulnerabilities in your system, getting into your vendor system or supplier systems or your customer system, and that liability comes back to you. So that gets covered under the third party section of the policy. There are regulatory fines and penalties which gets covered. So if the regulator comes back behind you because of any kind of data liability, that gets covered. And also the media liability. There is a lot of bad press around when there are attacks, cyber attacks. The beautiful part of the policy is that it also comes up with a ecosystem in place, the incident response ecosystem, which means that immediately after an attack, you may need a forensic company to come in and see, do the root cause analysis, or also to ensure how to plug the hole, how to ensure that the attack does not spread too much. So that forensics costs get covered. There can be legal implications. So law firms we need to hire, even those costs will get covered. You might have to notify the data subjects, who have lost their data. That notification costs will also get covered. So apart from being an insurance policy and paying you for the claim, this policy is also, it can be used as an ecosystem to ensure that the key claim is managed well and the responses are on time. Moving forward. Yes, we all know that that no insurance policy is without an exclusion. Similarly, cyber insurance also comes up with its own set of exclusions. The bodily injury and property damage does not get covered. Only the network interruption and ensuing business interruption will get covered. But we have a solution around bodily injury and property damage, which we'll be talking about in the next slide. Critical infrastructure. So failure of critical infrastructure is not covered. We understand that power and utility firms are in critical infrastructure in themselves. So anything happening to your own systems and attack to your own systems are covered. But someone who's supplying electricity to you or your internet service providers, they are considered as critical infrastructure for yourself. Their systems are not covered under the policy. The policy is defined to cover your systems and attacks and vulnerability in your systems. Errors and omission, unless there is a cyber attack, it does not get covered. Commercial crime, which we spoke about, the white collar frauds, it's in its by default form, the policy will exclude commercial crime, but Marsh has got certain additional wordings, extensions through which we can cover some online frauds or social engineering losses under the policy, so that can be defined. Similarly, there is no cover for war and terrorism, but Marsh has an arrangement with the insurance companies to get cyber terrorism carved back as a cover. But war, definitely, it's an exclusion under the policy. Moving forward. So this is the cyber exclusionary language, which generally the power and utility firms will have under their property policies in the mega or the fire policies, the clauses related to CL 380, which basically says that any use of IT systems, any loss arising out of the use of IT systems are not covered. Similarly, under the terrorism policy, you will have exclusion related to exclusion 9 of the LMA 3030, similar thing, very similar to CL 380. So this is what does it mean is that any kind of losses related, so property damage and ensuing business interruption related to a property damage arising out of a cyber event gets excluded under your property policy. Similarly, a cyber liability policy also excludes a property damage, kind of a loss. So how does it get covered? Marsh is a solution around it. We have a facility wherein there are certain Lloyd syndicates who have participated. It's being placed in the London market. So best of the insurers, reinsurers who participate in this facility, we can get you a cover, which basically means a buyback of your cyber exclusionary languages from your property policies, and those losses can get covered under your under this arrangement. So the gap, which basically derives out of your property and a cyber liability policy, will get covered via this arrangement. Moving forward, this is the gap insurance which I was talking about. It's a facility with Lloyds of London. So the rating of the reinsurers is you can be rest assured of. If the claim is denied under the property policy because citing of any of those exclusions which we mentioned, CL380 or under the terrorism policy, this particular endorsement will cover those losses. And yes, it's an insurance capital protection against uncovered cyber risk for you. So that's about cyber insurance. The other thing which I wanted to touch base upon was also on the environmental ESG, which has already been spoken about. I'll talk about the E of the ESG, which is the environmental legal liability. Now we all know that that's one of the risks which haunts the P&U power and utility firms the most. And yes, the NGT and the various laws which have been formulated against the pollution are not helping the cause. There have been a lot of fines and penalties which we have seen of late. The companies have to bear because of the various pollution or related events. You try and find out one, you will get tens of such cases. But to cover these kind of losses, there is an insurance solution which is available. Moving forward, yes, there is a very, very strict regulatory framework which is being formulated in India against these kind of environmental liability. There is Water Prevention Act, there is Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, there is NGT, there is Environment Protection Act 1986, Public Liability Insurance Act, and of late we have also seen a lot of cases arising out of this. So a few months back there was this large Korea-based chemical firm which had a gas leak in Vizag. We understand that the claim was in few crores. The NGT had asked them to deposit few crores with the regulatory body itself, and there have been quite a few large steel and mining manufacturing firm. Their plant has been shut down because of the water, which is water getting polluted. There have been enough and more such cases which we have seen. The screws are being tightened. So what is the solution around this? So we have something called as pollution legal liability. Now, many of you may have questions as to if we are already buying a CGL policy which covers pollution, why do we need a separate policy for that? The slide explains the difference between the two policies. CGL, you can get a cover for accidental and sudden pollution, which means that if there is an explosion, if there is a event which has happened, which is accidental in nature, and then there is pollution related claims, that can get covered under a CGL policy. But if something which is gradual, which is happening over the period of time, that is something which cannot get covered under a CGL policy. A CGL policy will also not cover for the own site or the third party site cleanups costs, which are being mandated now under various laws. So that's a difference. So what a pollution legal liability policy will cover, we'll tell you in the next slide. Moving on. Yeah, so these are the coverage under a pollution legal liability policy. It can cover third-party claims for on-site cleanup of pre-existing conditions, which means before taking the policy, even prior to that, if there are certain conditions which have not resulted into claim now, but that happens post we have taken the policy, that also can get covered. There are new conditions, obviously, which are developed post you taking the policy can get covered. It also covers bodily injury and property damage. Similarly, it can cover off-site as well. So your own site, even off-site, so wherein if you are using a warehouse which is rented, or a premise which is rented, or your pollutants go onto a different sites which is an adjoining site to you, the cleanup cost can get covered, of the bodily injury and property damage can go covered under the policy. There are other salient features of the policy which will cover your legal and defense cost. If there are allegations against you which you have to defend, those will get covered. Even a business interruption loss, because if a part of your business has to be closed down because of a pollution related claim, the business interruption, ensuing business interruption can get covered. Even during transportation, if there is a release of toxins in the air or in the water, liabilities arising out of that can get covered. And as the policy suggests, it's covering all kinds of pollution. So there is no distinction between a sudden or an accidental pollution. All kind of pollution related claims will get covered. So that's all from my side. Yes, happy to take questions. Over to you, Gautam.
I would like to thank all the speakers with me today here, and thank you for being with us throughout. For all the participants, we are open for the question and answers. If you have any questions, you may just type it in the Q&A tab so that we can pick it up. While you do that, let me thank you all again for joining with us today. In our Power webinar series, Power Knowledge series, we have completed 2 webinars in November and December now, covering all the prominent topics that we felt affected or impacted our sector in 2021, primarily being the environmental social governance, and the parametric solutions that we have brought in as a solution for our clients, the total cost of risk or risk finance optimization that we covered in our chapter 1. In this chapter, we covered with you the regional updates on how the markets are responding, what is new in the, how the markets will turn up probably in the Q1 of 2022. So for you to be prepared, what are the claim scenarios with the large claims impacted our industry? And definitely we just completed with our emerging boardroom discussion, which we perceive will definitely happen in 22 and going forward, which is cyber and environmental impairment liability. As just repeating what we have already done, Glenn mentioned about the ESG rating tool. We discussed about it. In India, we have started doing this exercise for our clients. Any of you whoever is interested to get the ESG rating, we can do that interim exercise with you. Please write back to us, and we'll be keen. And I'm sure underwriters will also be keen to see your ESG ratings in the future placements, and this will assist. Thank you for being with us. We are 6 minutes over our time, and thank you for being patient throughout, for listening us throughout. We are in December, and would like to wish each one of you a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.